The bustling Atlanta International Airport was packed with travelers on what seemed like an ordinary Tuesday morning. The terminal buzzed with the familiar sounds of rolling suitcases, announcement chimes, and hurried footsteps. Among the sea of faces, a towering figure stood out, none other than NBA legend Shaquille O'Neal, making his way through the crowd. At 7 feet 1 inch, Shaq was impossible to miss, yet he carried himself with a quiet humility that day. He wore simple clothes, a comfortable gray sweatsuit and his signature oversized headphones around his neck. As he walked toward his gate, a few starstruck passengers nudged each other and pointed, while others pretended not to notice, trying to play it cool. The gate area was already filling up when he arrived. Families with young children, business travelers typing away on laptops, and elderly couples settling into the hard plastic seats. But one person, in particular, caught Shaq's attention, an elderly gentleman sitting quietly in the corner, wearing a worn Veterans Affairs cap and a faded military jacket covered in service patches. The veteran, who would later be known to be 78-year-old Robert Williams, sat with perfect posture despite his visible discomfort. His weathered hands rested on a wooden cane, and beside him lay a small, well-used duffel bag. He was heading to visit his grandchildren in Los Angeles, a trip he had been saving up for months to make. As the boarding process began, Shaq watched as the veteran slowly stood up, grimacing slightly as he put weight on his legs. Without hesitation, the basketball legend made his way over to the airline counter. What happened next would soon become a story that would touch hearts across the nation. The gate agent's eyes widened as Shaq approached, but he spoke to her quietly, gesturing toward the veteran. A few moments later, she nodded with a warm smile and began typing on her computer. Meanwhile, Robert had no idea what was transpiring. He was too focused on gathering his belongings and preparing for the long flight ahead. When first-class boarding was announced, Robert reached for his economy ticket, preparing to wait his turn. That's when a gentle tap on his shoulder made him turn around. Looking up, way up, he found himself face to face with Shaquille O'Neal, who was holding out a boarding pass. "Sir," Shaq said with genuine respect in his voice, "I'd be honored if you would take my seat in first class." The surrounding passengers fell silent, many pulling out their phones to capture the moment. Robert stood there, stunned, his mouth slightly open in surprise. "I couldn't possibly," Robert began to protest, but Shaq's warm smile and gentle insistence made it clear this wasn't just a casual offer. "You've served our country," Shaq explained, his voice carrying the sincerity that had made him beloved both on and off the court. "The least I can do is make sure you fly comfortably." The story might have ended there, a simple act of kindness from one man to another. But what happened next showed why this moment would resonate with people far beyond that airport gate. As Robert finally accepted the ticket with trembling hands, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something that made Shaq's eyes mist over, a faded photograph from 1965, showing a young Robert in his military uniform. "I was in Vietnam," Robert shared quietly, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "Never thought I'd live to see my grandkids, let alone fly first class to visit them." The photo transformed this chance encounter into something deeper, a bridge between generations, between different kinds of service to others. Other passengers watched as these two men from vastly different worlds connected over that small photograph. Shaq listened intently as Robert pointed out his fellow soldiers in the picture, each name accompanied by a brief story. The basketball star's famous smile was replaced by an expression of genuine reverence. The gate agent, who had been watching the scene unfold, discreetly wiped away a tear. She'd seen countless celebrities pass through these gates, but this was different. This wasn't about publicity or image, it was about two human beings sharing a moment of genuine connection and respect. As the boarding continued, Shaq insisted on carrying Robert's duffel bag to the jet bridge. The other passengers watched as the 7 feet 1 inch basketball legend walked alongside the veteran, matching his slower pace, engaging in conversation as if they were old friends. Their laughter echoed down the corridor, bridging the decades and experiences that separated them. Before they parted ways at the aircraft door, Robert turned to Shaq one last time. "You know," he said with a slight smile, "my grandkids won't believe this. They're always talking about you." Shaq's response was to pull out his phone and insist on taking a selfie with Robert, making sure the veteran had something tangible to share with his family. As Robert settled into the spacious first-class seat that would have been Shaq's, fellow passengers couldn't help but notice how the basketball star's simple act of kindness had transformed the entire atmosphere of the flight. The usual tension and stress of air travel had been replaced by something warmer, more human. Back in economy class, Shaq folded his large frame into the standard seat, yet his smile never dimmed. When a flight attendant quietly thanked him for his gesture, he simply shook his head. "No thanks needed," he said. Sometimes the biggest victories have nothing to do with basketball. This story would eventually make its way onto social media, shared by passengers who witnessed it. But unlike many viral moments, this one struck a deeper chord. It wasn't just about a celebrity doing something nice, it was about respect, about acknowledging sacrifice, about the simple human connections that can happen when we look beyond ourselves. The truth is, such moments happen every day, small acts of kindness between strangers that often go unnoticed. But sometimes, when the right people come together at the right moment, these acts of kindness remind us all of our capacity for compassion and connection. As the plane took off from Atlanta that morning, carrying a veteran in first class and an NBA legend in economy, it carried something else too, a reminder that true greatness isn't measured by height, fame, or accomplishments, but by the ability to see the humanity in others and act accordingly. News of Shaq's heartwarming gesture spread quickly through social media, but what happened after the flight landed in Los Angeles revealed even deeper layers to this story. As passengers disembarked at LAX, Robert found himself walking alongside Shaq once again, this time sharing stories about his grandchildren. The veteran's eyes lit up as he talked about his grandson's basketball dreams, never expecting what would happen next. Shaq listened intently, nodding and smiling, before reaching into his bag and pulling out a fresh basketball. With a marker from his pocket, he signed it, adding a personal message, "To Tommy, dream big, work hard, and always respect your grandfather. He's a true hero." At the baggage claim area, a small crowd had gathered, word having spread through the terminal about the famous passenger and his act of kindness. But what caught everyone's attention wasn't Shaq's celebrity status, it was the genuine friendship that had formed between these two men during their cross-country journey. Robert's family was waiting at arrivals, his daughter Patricia, her husband, and 3 excited grandchildren. The look of disbelief on their faces when they saw their grandfather walking out with Shaquille O'Neal was priceless. Tommy, the 12-year-old grandson, stood frozen, his mouth agape, clutching his worn basketball. What happened next showed why Shaq had earned the nickname, the Big Friendly Giant, throughout his career. Instead of just saying goodbye, he spent the next 15 minutes with Robert's family, taking photos, sharing stories, and even demonstrating some basketball moves with Tommy in the middle of the airport terminal. Patricia, wiping tears from her eyes, revealed something that made the moment even more meaningful. Her father, Robert, had been fighting a private battle with his health, and this trip to see his grandchildren might be one of his last chances to spend time with them. The first-class seat wasn't just a comfortable journey, it was a gift of dignity during a precious family visit. The story could have ended there, but Shaq had one more surprise in store. Learning about Robert's situation, he quietly arranged for the family to attend an upcoming Lakers game as VIP guests. Not for publicity or recognition, but because something about Robert's quiet strength and humility had touched him deeply. Back at their home, Robert's family gathered around as he shared more details about the flight. He described how Shaq had insisted on giving up his seat, how they'd talked about life, service, and family. But what struck them most was how the basketball legend had treated their father not as a charity case, but as an equal worthy of respect and friendship. The following week, when Robert and his family attended the Lakers game, they were surprised to find themselves seated in a private box. During halftime, Shaq, who was there as a commentator, made his way up to spend time with them. He brought signed jerseys for the grandchildren and something special for Robert, a custom-made Lakers jacket with "Veteran" embroidered on the back. The stadium cameras caught the moment, and soon the story was featured on national news. But unlike many viral sensations, this one sparked a deeper conversation about respect, gratitude, and the ways we honor those who've served. Social media filled with stories of other veterans, other acts of kindness, creating a ripple effect of compassion. Local veterans groups began reaching out, sharing how the story had inspired others to take action. A group of business executives in Atlanta started a program to upgrade veterans' flights whenever possible. Small gestures, perhaps, but meaningful ones that showed how a single act of kindness could multiply. Robert's grandson Tommy, inspired by Shaq's kindness, started a project at his school to collect letters and care packages for deployed service members. When asked why, he simply said, "Because my grandpa taught me that heroes come in all forms, and sometimes they even give up their first-class seats." The friendship between Shaq and Robert didn't end with the flight or the basketball game. They kept in touch, exchanging occasional messages and updates. When Robert's health took a turn for the worse a few months later, one of the first calls the family received was from Shaq, offering support and encouragement. What made this story resonate with so many people wasn't just the celebrity angle, it was the genuine human connection that had formed between two men from different worlds. It reminded people that beneath our different uniforms, whether military fatigues or basketball jerseys, we're all capable of touching others' lives in meaningful ways. In interviews, when asked about the incident, Shaq consistently deflected praise, instead using the platform to highlight the sacrifices of veterans like Robert. He spoke about how his own father's military service had taught him the importance of respect and gratitude, values that no amount of basketball success could overshadow. The story became a powerful reminder that true character isn't measured in grand gestures or public declarations, but in the quiet moments when we choose to see and honor the humanity in others. It showed that sometimes the most meaningful connections happen not in the spotlight, but in the simple act of one person reaching out to another. As time passed, the viral moment faded from headlines, but its impact continued to ripple through lives touched by the story. In veteran support groups, airport terminals, and basketball courts across the country, people shared their own versions of the tale, each adding to a growing tapestry of kindness and connection. For Robert's family, the experience became more than just a remarkable encounter with a celebrity, it was a testament to their father's quiet dignity, a reminder that service and sacrifice don't go unnoticed, and proof that even in our fast-paced, often disconnected world, genuine human connections can still flourish in the most unexpected places. The impact of Shaq and Robert's chance encounter continued to grow in unexpected ways. One morning, about a month after their flight, Robert received a package at his home. Inside was a custom-made photo album, professionally bound in leather, with a simple note from Shaq, "For a true hero, so your grandkids will always remember our story." The album wasn't filled with just photos from their airport meeting or the Lakers game. Somehow, Shaq had managed to collect images from Robert's military service, carefully restored and preserved. There were pictures of young Robert in Vietnam, photos of his unit, and even newspaper clippings from the time. The final pages showed their recent moments together, creating a bridge between past and present. Word of this thoughtful gesture spread through the local veterans community. Soon, other veterans began sharing their own stories, not just of service, but of the small acts of kindness that had touched their lives. A local coffee shop started a Veterans Corner wall, inspired by Robert's photo album, where servicemen and women could share their photographs and stories. The owner of the coffee shop, whose own father had served in the military, noticed something remarkable. People would spend hours looking at the photos, reading the stories, and often leaving with tears in their eyes. The wall became a gathering place for veterans and civilians alike, bridging generations and experiences. Back in Los Angeles, Tommy, Robert's grandson, had started bringing his signed basketball to school for show and tell. But instead of bragging about meeting a famous athlete, he talked about his grandfather's service and the importance of respecting veterans. His teachers were so moved that they invited Robert to speak at a school assembly. Initially hesitant about public speaking, Robert found himself sharing stories with hundreds of attentive students. He talked about his time in Vietnam, but more importantly, he spoke about the value of kindness and respect, lessons he'd seen demonstrated so powerfully by Shaq that day at the airport. The assembly had an unexpected effect on the school community. Students began noticing the veterans in their own families and neighborhoods. They started a project called Heroes Among Us, documenting the stories of local veterans and active service members. What began as one child's proud moment with his grandfather's story grew into a community-wide movement. Meanwhile, Shaq's simple act of giving up his first-class seat had inspired other athletes and celebrities. A well-known musician quietly started upgrading military families' flights whenever he traveled. A popular actress established a foundation to support veterans' travel needs. These weren't publicized charity events, they were genuine attempts to follow Shaq's example of quiet kindness. The airline industry took notice too. Several major carriers implemented new policies making it easier for passengers to donate their upgrades to military personnel. Flight attendants reported a surge in spontaneous acts of kindness, with passengers increasingly offering their better seats to service members, elderly travelers, and families in need. Robert's health continued to be a concern, but the joy from these ongoing developments seemed to give him renewed energy. His doctors noticed a positive change in his outlook, attributing it not just to the extraordinary experience with Shaq, but to the sense of purpose he'd found in sharing his story and inspiring others. During one of his regular hospital visits, Robert was surprised to find a care package waiting for him. Inside were letters from NBA players, both current and retired, sharing their own stories of family members who had served in the military. Each letter expressed gratitude for veterans like Robert, showing how one connection had spawned many more. The local newspaper ran a feature story about the ripple effects of Shaq and Robert's encounter. They interviewed people who had been on the original flight, gathering their perspectives on how witnessing that moment had changed their own attitudes and behaviors. One businessman admitted he'd started paying more attention to the veterans in his community, even starting a hiring initiative at his company specifically targeting military veterans. Robert's daughter Patricia noticed other changes in her father. He began pulling out old photographs and documents from his service years, sharing stories he'd never told before. It was as if Shaq's recognition of his service had opened a door, allowing him to finally share these important parts of his life with his family. The grandchildren, especially Tommy, soaked up these stories like sponges. They began recording their grandfather's memories, creating a digital archive that could be shared with future generations. What started as one extraordinary day at an airport had transformed into a family's journey of discovery and connection. During a follow-up visit to the VA hospital, Robert met a young veteran struggling to adjust to civilian life. Sharing his own story, including the unexpected friendship with Shaq, Robert helped the young man see that life could still hold wonderful surprises. Their conversation led to a regular veteran support group, where stories of hope and resilience were shared weekly. The story continued to unfold in quiet, meaningful ways. Local schools began incorporating lessons about respect, kindness, and service into their curricula. Community organizations started reaching out to veterans, not just during holidays or special events, but as valued members of their everyday activities. Through it all, Robert remained humble, just as he had been that day at the airport. When asked about the ongoing impact of his encounter with Shaq, he would simply smile and say, "Sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in unexpected packages, even if that package is 7 feet tall." His words, like the story itself, carried a simple truth, that genuine kindness, respect, and human connection have the power to transform not just moments, but entire communities. The story of Shaq and Robert had become more than a viral moment or a feel-good headline. it had become a catalyst for positive change, one small act of kindness at a time. As autumn approached, Robert's story took an unexpected turn when his grandson Tommy's middle school basketball team made it to the district championships. The young boy, inspired by both his grandfather's strength and Shaq's kindness, had been practicing relentlessly. Before each game, he would touch the signed basketball for luck, remembering the day his grandfather walked off that plane with an NBA legend. The championship game was scheduled for a Friday evening, and the whole family planned to attend. What they didn't know was that Shaq, hearing about Tommy's progress through occasional texts with Robert, had made special arrangements to be there. He cleared his broadcasting schedule, quietly coordinating with the school principal to make his appearance a surprise. The small school gymnasium was packed with excited families when Robert arrived, supported by Patricia and his walking cane. His health had been steadily declining, but nothing could keep him from watching his grandson play. The crowd respectfully parted to let him reach his reserved seat near the court, many recognizing him from the now famous story. Just before tip-off, a familiar figure ducked through the gymnasium doorway, causing a wave of whispers to spread through the crowd. Shaq, dressed casually in a polo shirt and slacks, made his way to sit beside Robert. The two men embraced like old friends, their genuine affection evident to everyone watching. Tommy, warming up on the court, froze mid-dribble when he spotted Shaq sitting next to his grandfather. The look of pure joy and disbelief on his face captured the magic of the moment perfectly. His teammates stood in awe, suddenly realizing that the story Tommy had been telling for months was absolutely true. What happened during that game became local legend. Tommy played with newfound confidence, inspired by his two heroes watching from the sidelines. Between quarters, Shaq would lean over to Robert, commenting on the game, sharing laughs, and cheering Tommy's team on. Their friendship, forged in a chance encounter months ago, had only grown stronger. The opposing team's players and parents were equally moved by Shaq's presence, especially when they learned why he was there. During halftime, he spent time with both teams, sharing tips and encouragement, making sure every child felt special. But everyone could see his special bond with Robert and Tommy's family. Tommy's team won the championship by 2 points, with Tommy scoring the winning basket in the final seconds. As the crowd erupted in cheers, Shaq lifted Robert from his seat in celebration, careful to support him while sharing in the joy of the moment. The photograph of their celebration, with Robert's arms raised in victory despite his frail condition, would later become a symbol of triumph over adversity. After the game, Shaq hosted a pizza party for both teams and their families at a local restaurant. He insisted on sitting with Robert, sharing stories, and making sure everyone knew that the real hero at the table wasn't the NBA legend but the quiet veteran who had served his country decades ago. During the party, Robert shared something he hadn't told anyone yet: his doctors had given him only a few months to live. The cancer had spread more aggressively than expected. Shaq listened with tears in his eyes, but Robert wasn't seeking sympathy. Instead, he expressed gratitude for how their chance encounter had enriched his final chapter. That evening sparked another initiative. Shaq, deeply moved by Robert's revelation, began working with the NBA to establish a program called Veterans Victory Lap. The program would ensure that veterans could attend sporting events with their families, creating lasting memories just like Robert and Tommy had that night. The local community rallied around Robert's family in the weeks that followed. The school where Tommy played basketball started an annual Veterans Appreciation Game in Robert's honor. The tradition would include having local veterans share their stories with students, keeping alive the spirit of connection that had started with that fateful flight. As Robert's condition worsened, Shaq remained a constant presence in the family's life, not through grand gestures, but through regular phone calls, text messages, and small acts of kindness. He arranged for the best medical care, not as a celebrity pulling strings, but as a friend who cared deeply about a man who had become like family. The story reached beyond their immediate community. Other NBA teams began implementing their own veterans programs. Airlines that had heard about the original story started reserving first-class seats specifically for elderly veterans. The ripple effect of one simple act of kindness continued to spread, touching lives across the country. Patricia noticed that her father seemed more at peace during his final days, often smiling as he watched Tommy practice basketball in the driveway. The signed ball from that first meeting sat proudly displayed in their living room, not just as a piece of memorabilia, but as a symbol of how unexpected friendships can change lives. The local VA hospital, where Robert received treatment, started a storytelling program, encouraging veterans to share their experiences. They named it the Robert Williams Legacy Program, focusing not just on war stories, but on the everyday moments of kindness and connection that make life meaningful. Through it all, Shaq remained humble about his role in the story, always redirecting attention to Robert and other veterans. When interviewed about their friendship, he would simply say, "Some people measure life in championships won. Others, like Robert, measure it in lives touched. I'm just grateful to have been part of his story." As autumn turned to winter, Robert's story continued to inspire others to look beyond superficial differences and recognize the humanity in everyone they met. His legacy wasn't just about a chance encounter with a basketball legend, it was about how that encounter had sparked a movement of kindness that continued to grow, one small act at a time. Winter arrived with a blanket of snow over the city, and Robert's condition continued to decline. Yet his spirit remained unbroken, fueled by the incredible community that had formed around him. The story of his friendship with Shaq had evolved into something much larger than either of them could have imagined. One cold December morning, Robert received an unexpected invitation. The NBA was planning a special Heroes Night at the Staples Center, inspired by his story. Veterans from across the country would be honored during a Lakers home game, with Robert as the guest of honor. Despite his weakening health, his eyes lit up at the prospect. His doctors were concerned about the travel, but Robert was determined. "Some journeys," he told them with a gentle smile, "are worth any risk." Shaq personally arranged for a medical transport flight, ensuring Robert would have all the care he needed during the trip. The same airline from their first encounter stepped forward, providing first-class accommodations for the entire family. The day of the event, the Staples Center was transformed. Photos of veterans, including a young Robert in his military uniform, lined the corridors. Servicemen and women from different eras shared stories in the stands, creating bridges between generations of warriors. The atmosphere was electric with emotion and respect. Shaq insisted on pushing Robert's wheelchair himself as they made their way through the arena. The crowd rose in a standing ovation, not just for the basketball legend, but for the veteran who had unknowingly started a movement of kindness. Tommy walked alongside them, proudly wearing his grandfather's military jacket over his Lakers jersey. During halftime, something extraordinary happened. Rather than the usual entertainment, the lights dimmed, and a video began playing on the giant screens. It showed countless acts of kindness that had been inspired by Robert and Shaq's story, passengers giving up seats for veterans, communities creating support programs, young people reaching out to elderly service members. The camera panned to Robert, who watched with tears streaming down his face. But they weren't tears of sadness, they were tears of joy at seeing how a simple act of kindness had multiplied beyond measure. Beside him, Shaq placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. The two men connected in a moment of profound understanding. After the video, several NBA players, including some of the league's biggest stars, came forward to share stories about veterans in their own families. Each one knelt before Robert, thanking him not just for his service, but for being part of a story that had reminded people of the power of human connection. The Lakers coach announced the creation of a scholarship fund in Robert's name, dedicated to supporting veterans' children who dreamed of playing basketball. Tommy would be its first recipient, ensuring that Robert's legacy would continue through the sport that had brought him and Shaq together. During a quiet moment in the VIP suite, Robert shared something with Shaq that he hadn't told anyone else. He pulled out his old military compass, weathered by time and combat, and pressed it into Shaq's massive hands. "This helped me find my way home from Vietnam," he said softly. "Now it's yours, to remember that sometimes the greatest journeys aren't about where you're going, but who you meet along the way." The gesture moved Shaq deeply. In return, he removed his NBA championship ring and placed it in Robert's palm. "This isn't just a ring," he explained, his voice thick with emotion. "It's a promise that your story will keep touching lives long after we're gone." Local veterans groups across the country began organizing similar events in their communities, creating spaces where service members could share their stories and build connections. Schools started inviting veterans to speak, not just on Memorial Day or Veterans Day, but throughout the year, helping students understand the human side of service and sacrifice. The airline industry, inspired by the ongoing impact of the story, created a nationwide program called Heroes in the Sky, permanently dedicating first-class seats on every flight for elderly veterans. Other companies followed suit, finding their own ways to honor those who had served. Back home, Tommy's basketball team had started a new tradition. Before each game, they would take a moment to recognize any veterans in the crowd, a simple gesture that helped young players understand that some heroes wore uniforms different from the ones they saw on TV. Robert's health continued to decline, but his spirit soared. Each day brought new stories of how his chance encounter with Shaq had inspired others to reach across divides, to see the humanity in strangers, to understand that every person has a story worth hearing. The local coffee shop's Veterans Corner had grown into a full wall of photographs and stories, with Robert's and Shaq's story at its center. People would often gather there, sharing their own experiences of unexpected kindness, creating a living testament to the power of human connection. As winter deepened, Robert found peace in knowing that his story had become something larger than himself. It wasn't just about a basketball star giving up his seat, it was about how that one moment had reminded people of their capacity for kindness, their ability to see beyond surface differences to the heart of what makes us human. As January drew to a close, Robert's health took a severe turn. The hospital room where he now spent his days became a gathering place for an extraordinary extended family, his blood relatives, fellow veterans, and of course, Shaq, who would fly in whenever he could, regardless of his busy schedule. The hospital staff was moved by the steady stream of visitors, each carrying stories of how Robert's journey had touched their lives. A young nurse discovered that her own grandfather had served in the same unit as Robert in Vietnam. She brought in his old photographs, creating an impromptu reunion across time through shared memories and stories. Shaq arranged for a special hospital room television feed so Robert could watch all the Lakers games. During broadcasts, he would often give Robert special shout-outs, ensuring that the veterans' fighting spirit continued to inspire others. The network started featuring stories of other veterans during game breaks, creating a ripple effect of recognition and respect. Tommy had taken to doing his homework in his grandfather's hospital room, often spreading his books across the foot of the bed. Robert would help him with history assignments, turning dry textbook facts into vivid stories from his own experiences. These precious moments of connection between grandfather and grandson were captured in a journal that Patricia had started keeping. One particularly meaningful evening, several veterans from Robert's old unit managed to visit together. They brought their old unit flag, carefully preserved over the decades. The reunion was filmed by a local news crew, not as a sensation, but as a quiet testimony to the bonds that unite those who serve together. The footage found its way to military bases around the world. Young service members began writing letters to Robert, sharing how his story had affected them. A group of soldiers in Afghanistan started a tradition of sharing acts of kindness they witnessed or performed each day, inspired by the ripple effect of Robert's story. Shaq used his platform to ensure these new stories were heard too. During his sports commentary, he would often weave in mentions of how current service members were carrying forward the legacy of kindness that had started with that fateful flight. The network supported this, creating a regular segment called Heroes Among Us. Robert's room gradually filled with mementos of the movement his story had inspired, letters from strangers, pictures of veterans being honored at sporting events, news clippings of similar acts of kindness. The walls became a testament to how one simple gesture could multiply into thousands of moments of human connection. The local high school basketball team made Robert their honorary coach, setting up a video feed so he could watch their games and offer advice from his hospital room. They dedicated their season to him, wearing patches with his military unit's insignia on their jerseys. The opposing teams, learning of the story, would often join in pre-game ceremonies honoring veterans. Patricia noticed how these connections seemed to give her father strength, even as his body weakened. He would light up with each new visitor, each shared story, each piece of news about how his journey with Shaq had inspired others to reach out across divides of age, background, and experience. The hospital's pediatric ward heard about Robert's story and arranged for young patients to visit him. These children, fighting their own battles, found inspiration in the veteran's quiet strength and gentle humor. Robert would share simplified versions of his stories, always emphasizing the importance of kindness and courage. Shaq made sure Tommy stayed connected to basketball, arranging for him to attend NBA practices when he wasn't with his grandfather. The other players took the boy under their wing, understanding that they weren't just teaching him basketball, they were helping him cope with the impending loss of his hero. The Winter Olympics were approaching, and several athletes had heard Robert's story. They began wearing special patches honoring veterans during their training sessions. A snowboarder dedicated his run to Robert, wearing a uniform designed with military honors. The international sports community embraced the message of respect and gratitude. Local businesses near the hospital started a program called Veterans First, ensuring that service members and their families had special access to services and support. What began as a response to Robert's story grew into a sustainable community initiative, proving that kindness could become institutional. Robert's doctors were amazed by his resilience, noting how the constant flow of love and support seemed to defy medical expectations. They began studying the impact of community connection on patient well-being, using Robert's case as a pioneering example of how social bonds could affect health outcomes. The hospital's administration, moved by the transformation they'd witnessed, established a new policy ensuring that veterans' rooms would always have space for family gatherings and story sharing. They understood that healing involved more than just medicine, it required human connection and dignity. Through it all, Shaq remained a steady presence, whether in person or through daily video calls. He would often bring his own children to visit, ensuring that the next generation understood the importance of respecting and honoring those who had served. These visits were never publicized, they were simply moments of genuine human connection. As February approached, Robert's story had become woven into the fabric of communities across the country. It wasn't just about a basketball star and a veteran anymore, it was about how simple acts of kindness could transform lives, bridge generations, and remind people of their shared humanity. Every person who visited Robert's hospital room left with a deeper understanding of what it meant to serve others, whether through military service or through daily acts of kindness. His legacy was building, not in monuments or medals, but in the countless small gestures of respect and connection that his story had inspired. As February brought its chill winds, Robert's hospital room had become a sacred space of stories and solidarity. The walls were now covered with children's drawings from local schools, each one depicting scenes of kindness inspired by his journey. A particularly touching illustration showed a tall figure giving up his seat to a smaller one, drawn with the pure honesty that only children can capture. The nursing staff had noticed something remarkable about Robert's room, it had become a place where barriers dissolved. Doctors would linger after their rounds, drawn into conversations with visitors from all walks of life. CEOs sat beside janitors, sharing stories about their own family members who had served. The room had become a lesson in how human connection transcends social boundaries. Shaq continued his regular visits, but now they carried a different weight. Both men knew their time together was growing short, yet their conversations remained filled with hope and humor. They would watch basketball games together, with Robert offering commentary that often left Shaq doubled over in laughter, his famous smile brightening the sterile hospital environment. One afternoon, a group of young veterans from a local rehabilitation center visited Robert. They were struggling with their own battles, some physical, others invisible. Robert listened to their stories with the same attention he'd received from Shaq months ago on that fateful flight. By the end of the visit, these young warriors stood taller, finding strength in the connection with one of their own. Tommy had started a project at school, collecting oral histories from veterans in the community. His teacher noticed how his grandfather's story had transformed the young boy from a shy student into a confident speaker who could connect with people of all ages. The project grew into a district-wide initiative, creating bridges between generations through storytelling. The airline that had witnessed the original act of kindness announced a permanent program named Robert Seats, a system where passengers could easily donate their upgrades to veterans and their families. Other airlines followed suit, proving that corporate policies could be shaped by human compassion. Patricia had been documenting everything in a journal, capturing the quiet moments between the headlines. She wrote about how her father would still straighten his hospital sheets with military precision, how his eyes would light up when Tommy rushed in after school, how he would insist on standing, despite his weakness, whenever a fellow veteran entered the room. The NBA announced the creation of a new award, the Robert Williams Veteran Service Award, to be given to players who showed exceptional commitment to supporting veterans in their communities. Shaq was named its first recipient, though he insisted that Robert should be the one presenting it to future generations of players. Local coffee shops across the country began creating their own veterans' corners, inspired by the original wall of photographs. These spaces became gathering points for community storytelling, where veterans could share their experiences and civilians could listen and learn. The movement had grown beyond basketball, beyond airlines, into the daily fabric of American life. Robert's doctors had started documenting what they called the Williams effect, how a patient's well-being could be dramatically improved through community connection and purpose. Medical journals expressed interest in studying how social bonds could impact health outcomes, particularly in veteran populations. One morning, a group of elementary school students arrived with a special gift, a quilt they had made, each square representing an act of kindness they had performed in Robert's honor. The children sat on the floor of his hospital room, sharing their stories while Shaq, who happened to be visiting, led them in a discussion about what it means to be a hero. The local library established a special collection of veteran stories, with Robert and Shaq's story as its cornerstone. They created programs where veterans could record their experiences, ensuring that future generations would understand the human side of service and sacrifice. Tommy's basketball team had made it to their state championships, playing with a passion inspired by his grandfather's courage. Robert watched the games via live stream, his pride evident in every tired smile. The team didn't just play for victory, they played to honor the values of respect and determination that Robert had taught them. The hospital's therapy dog program had taken special interest in Robert's room. The dogs seemed to sense the unique energy there, often staying longer than their usual visits. Their presence brought comfort not just to Robert, but to the steady stream of visitors who came to share their stories and find connection. A group of film students from a nearby college asked permission to document the ongoing impact of Robert's story. They captured moments of quiet courage, unexpected friendships, and the ripple effects of kindness that continued to spread. The resulting documentary would later be used in schools to teach about character and community. Through it all, Robert remained humble, often redirecting attention to others' stories. He would remind visitors that his friendship with Shaq wasn't about celebrity, it was about recognizing the humanity in each person we meet. His wisdom, shaped by war and softened by kindness, touched everyone who entered his room. Shaq had arranged for a special basketball hoop to be installed where Robert could see it from his bed. On good days, Tommy would practice there, his grandfather calling out gentle coaching tips. These moments, witnessed by hospital staff and visitors, became powerful symbols of how love and determination could bridge even the widest gaps. The Winter Olympics were underway, and athletes had begun dedicating their performances to veterans like Robert. His story had crossed international borders, reminding people everywhere that courage comes in many forms, and that kindness knows no boundaries. As February drew to a close, Robert's hospital room had become a place of quiet reflection and profound connection. The morning light filtered through windows decorated with cards and drawings, casting gentle shadows on the walls that had witnessed so many moments of shared humanity. On a particularly peaceful Sunday morning, Shaq arrived early, carrying a small box that held something special. Inside was a custom-made medal, created by the NBA in collaboration with veteran organizations. It wasn't just another piece of hardware, it was a symbol of how one act of kindness had grown into a movement that touched countless lives. Tommy was there, sitting close to his grandfather's bed, working on his latest school project, a presentation about everyday heroes. Robert watched with pride as his grandson practiced, his voice growing stronger with each retelling of their story. The young boy had learned that true strength often came wrapped in simple moments of human connection. The doctors had warned the family that Robert's time was growing short, but his spirit remained undiminished. He continued to greet every visitor with warmth, share stories with unwavering enthusiasm, and inspire others with his quiet dignity. His room had become a sanctuary where people found the courage to share their own stories of struggle and triumph. Local veterans groups had organized a special tribute outside the hospital, a gentle parade of motorcycles, each rider carrying an American flag. The rumble of engines drew Robert to the window, where he stood with Shaq's support, tears streaming down his face as he saluted his fellow servicemen and women. Patricia noticed how her father's story had changed the hospital itself. Staff members spoke of how they'd begun asking patients about their lives, not just their symptoms. The simple act of listening, of acknowledging each person's journey, had become part of the healing process. That evening, as sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors, Robert shared a final conversation with Shaq. They talked about basketball, about service, about family, but mostly about the surprising ways life brings people together. Sometimes, Robert said softly, the greatest gift we can give another person is simply to see them. In the early hours of the next morning, Robert passed away peacefully, surrounded by his family. Shaq, who had stayed through the night, stood silently as dawn broke over the city. The giant of basketball wept unashamedly for his friend, the veteran who had taught him that true greatness lies not in fame or achievement, but in the capacity to touch others' lives. The news spread quickly, but not as a tragedy. Instead, it was shared as a celebration of a life well lived, of bridges built between strangers, of the enduring power of human kindness. Social media filled not with condolences, but with stories of how Robert's journey had inspired others to reach out, to connect, to make a difference. The funeral service was held in the high school gymnasium where Tommy played basketball. It was filled beyond capacity, with people standing in the doorways and hallways. Veterans in dress uniforms stood alongside basketball players in jerseys, a visual testimony to how Robert's story had brought different worlds together. Shaq delivered the eulogy, his voice thick with emotion as he spoke about the man who had become so much more than a chance encounter on a flight. He spoke of Robert's dignity, his humility, his ability to make everyone feel valued. Some people measure success in points scored or battles won, he said. Robert measured it in lives touched and bridges built. Tommy, wearing his grandfather's military jacket over his basketball jersey, shared his own tribute. He spoke of late-night conversations in the hospital room, of lessons learned about courage and kindness, of the legacy he would carry forward. The young boy's words, simple and heartfelt, moved many to tears. The NBA announced that all games that week would begin with a moment of silence, not just for Robert's service to his country, but for his role in reminding people of their shared humanity. Players wore special patches combining military insignia with basketball symbols, a visual representation of how Robert's story had bridged different worlds. In the months that followed, Robert's legacy continued to grow. The Veterans Victory Lap program expanded nationwide, ensuring that service members and their families could create lasting memories together. Schools incorporated lessons about kindness and service into their curricula, using Robert and Shaq's story as a teaching tool. Tommy's basketball team retired Robert's military number, hanging his jacket alongside championship banners in the gymnasium. Before each game, players would touch the jacket for inspiration, remembering that their greatest victories might not be on the scoreboard, but in how they treated others. The hospital created the Robert Williams Memorial Garden, a peaceful space where patients, families, and staff could find moments of connection and reflection. A simple bench bore a plaque with Robert's favorite saying, "Every stranger is just a friend you haven't met yet." Shaq established a foundation in Robert's name, dedicated to supporting veterans and their families. But more importantly, he continued to share their story, not as a celebrity anecdote, but as a reminder of how simple acts of kindness can transform lives. 1 year later, on the anniversary of that first flight, airports across the country held simultaneous ceremonies honoring veterans. The simple act of offering a seat had grown into a movement of recognition and respect, proving that sometimes the smallest gestures can have the largest impact. Robert's story lives on, not just in programs and plaques, but in the countless daily acts of kindness it continues to inspire. It reminds us that heroes walk among us in many forms, that strength can be found in gentleness, and that the connections we make with others are the true measure of a life well lived. In the end, the story of Shaq and Robert became more than a viral moment or a feel-good headline. It became a testament to the power of human connection, a reminder that in a world often divided, the simplest act of kindness can build bridges that last a lifetime.